I'm Hannah Whitaker, 33, and there was a night not long ago when my bedroom was the back seat of a 10-year-old sedan behind a big box store, the dome light my bedside lamp, and a zipped coat my blanket. I kept a roll of quarters in the cup holder for coffee in the morning and told myself that people get through worse even when the air bit through the glass. The strange part was how quickly a good life can vanish, like pulling a thread you think is loose, until the whole sweater slides to the floor. A few months earlier, I had a waiting list for clients' paint samples, fanned like playing cards on my drafting table, and a ring I admired in the mirror when I washed my hands. People called me dependable, steady, the one who could fix a room and calm an argument. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. Then came the kind of betrayal that doesn't just take your money, it takes the room you used to trust inside your own chest. Before I say more, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to rebuild after someone you loved pulled the rug out from under you. I grew up in a town where neighbors waved when they pulled the trash cans to the curb, and church potlucks turned into free furniture exchanges if a family fell on hard times. My mother taught elementary school and kept a jar of spare pencils by the door for kids who didn't have supplies. My father owned a little hardware store where he let folks run a tab when the month went long. We didn't have much, but the house always felt full with hand-me-down quilts, Saturday pancakes, and a rule that you told the truth, even when your voice shook. I took that rule with me when I left for design school, and later when I opened a studio over a bakery that started every morning at 4. I learned to work through the clatter of sheet pans and the smell of cinnamon. Clients came slow at first, then all at once bungalows that needed light kitchens, that needed calm offices, that wanted to feel human again. I loved the craft and the rhythm, measuring inches, counting trim boards, stretching dollars so ordinary rooms could breathe. Meeting Evan felt like another lucky break. He had an easy smile and an MBA, the kind of person who remembered servers' names and ordered wine without checking the label twice. My sister Lydia approved right away, which mattered to me more than I said out loud. She'd always been the bold one, breezing into a room like she owned the weather. We did Sunday dinners when we could swap recipes we never actually tried, and stayed late at my small apartment talking about travel and what our 30s could look like if we didn't blink. When work took me into nicer neighborhoods, those hillside streets where the mailboxes looked like sculptures and the driveways curved longer than the block I grew up on, I felt out of place at first. But I knew how to read a room, how to make something expensive feel warm, and soon my calendar was a patchwork of projects that pushed me and paid on time. If the bakery downstairs kept me grounded, those gated communities taught me that money can mow a lawn, but it can't always grow roots. The more success I found, the more I tried to bring my people with me. Lydia was getting her footing in real estate, and Evan had ideas for how I could scale without losing myself. Those were his words, and I liked how they sounded. I said yes when Lydia asked me to look over a listing presentation, and yes when Evan suggested a better bookkeeping system, and yes when a client asked if I could handle a second space on a tight deadline, because you're calm when the rest of us aren't. Saying yes had built my business. Saying yes felt like faith in action. I didn't see how yes could also be a door left unlocked. Even with the good months, my life was still practical yard sale chairs. I sanded myself a tidy savings account with a name that made me smile when I checked the balance. Home one day. I liked the ordinariness of it. I liked packing my lunches, walking to the studio, and feeling the bakery heat through the floorboards when the ovens were full. That steadiness made the other world the one with valet parking, and $300 candles feel like a job I did not a person I had to become. It also made me careful. I kept handwritten logs. I took photos of the backs of fabric bolts so I'd remember die lots. I learned the names of tile installers' kids. If this sounds old-fashioned, it is. It's also how I slept at night. There were small tremors before the ground split. A cousin asked me at a family barbecue if it was true I'd leveled up because a client posted about my work. Lydia laughed and said I'd always had good taste and that money looked better on me than I realized. Evan started talking about positioning and leverage words that made me think of crowbars, not contracts. And I noticed how my patience began to feel like a resource other people assumed would never run out. People are generous until they're tired, my mother used to say when she put down her grading pen and rubbed her eyes. I began to understand what she meant. The first real crack showed during a dinner where the food went cold because the conversation ran hot. Lydia brought up an opportunity tied to a new development on the Bay Harborview Heights, a name that sounded like glass and careful lawns. She said it was a chance to get in early, that the right introductions could move both our careers forward. Evan nodded excitement, smoothing out any doubt in his voice, and suggested we pool resources for speed. I remember the shape of the steam rising from the pot roast and the way my fork hovered, not because I knew something was wrong, but because something inside me asked for a minute. I didn't give it. I told myself, families build things together, that I was lucky to have people who wanted to stand beside me instead of on the sidelines, and that trust was a decision you made before you had every answer. I stacked the dinner plates in the sink, tucked leftovers into shallow dishes to cool, and promised we'd talk details later. That night, I lay awake, counting the slow turns of the ceiling fan, making lists in my head, what I owned free and clear, what I could risk, what I couldn't bear to lose. Morning brought a tidy to-do list and an inbox full of ordinary work, the kind that makes a day feel safe. I took that as a sign that caution and hope could live in the same body. Weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday, Evan walked into my studio with his laptop open and a look I'd never seen before, bright, urgent, and certain. Lydia was already on speaker, her voice quick with excitement, and the words "can't miss" floated between them like a banner. I reached for a pen, as if the right notes could protect me, and told them both to sit while I made coffee. That's when the next chapter began, knocking on the door I hadn't realized I'd left unlocked. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the studio windows, turning the dust in the air into floating gold. Evan stood near my drafting table, his laptop open, charts glowing across the screen. He talked quickly, words tumbling over one another, his excitement catching the room like static. Lydia's voice came through the speaker, bright and breathless, urging me to listen before the window closed. They had found what they called a perfect opportunity, a sustainable building startup that promised to change everything about how the design world sourced materials. "This is the future," Evan said, eyes bright. "It's what you believe in, Hannah. Green design, ethical sourcing. We just have to move fast." Lydia jumped in before I could ask a question. "I've already wired part of my savings." "You should do the same today," she said. "The investor group is small, and if you miss it, you'll regret it." She made it sound like a sisterly favor, like letting me in on a secret. I wanted to believe her. Evan closed his laptop with the confidence of a man who'd already made up his mind. "You've worked hard enough," he said softly. "It's time to let your money work for you." His hand rested on mine, warm and steady, the kind of touch that had talked me into trusting him before. I asked about paperwork, about contracts and oversight. Evan smiled the way people do when they think your caution is adorable. "Of course there's paperwork," he said. "I've gone through every line myself." Lydia laughed through the speaker. "He's got a degree in this, Han. Let the numbers guy handle the numbers. They meant well, or at least they looked like they did. It was hard to argue with the people who said they loved me most." That afternoon, we gathered at my dining table, the same one my father built when I got my first apartment. Evan spread out folders like a teacher grading a final exam. Lydia arrived with takeout and a bottle of champagne, already talking about what we'd do once the profits came through. They made it sound so simple. "Sign here, initial there, dream a little bigger." I looked at the lines of my name, waiting on the page, and felt a quiet pull between trust and hesitation. I signed anyway. The transfer went through just before sunset. $500,000, everything I'd built since the day I opened my doors, gone with a few clicks. Lydia hugged me, her perfume bright and sharp, saying we'd toast again when the returns rolled in. Evan kissed the top of my head and called me his partner in everything. I believed him. I wanted to. For a while, life went on as if nothing had changed. I designed a cafe for a local couple, picked new paint colors for a downtown hotel, and waited for the first progress report from the startup. Evan said the founders were traveling and updates would come soon. Lydia texted pictures of mood boards for properties she hoped to sell once the market picked up. I reminded myself that good investments take time. Then 2 weeks later, the website vanished. My login stopped working. Calls to the number listed went straight to a recorded message. I checked again that night and again the next morning. Each attempt met with silence. I sent Evan a screenshot expecting reassurance. He didn't reply. Lydia's phone rang once, then disconnected. A week passed before she called back, her voice tight. "It's fine," she said. "There's just been a rebranding. Don't panic." But panic had already settled in. I went to Evan's apartment and found boxes stacked in the hallway. He barely looked up from packing. "It's not my fault you didn't do your own research," he said. The words hit harder than any shout could. "Investment involves risk. You knew that." He closed another box, taped it, and moved to the next like we were strangers dividing furniture after a breakup. The next morning I opened my business account and saw what he'd left behind. Nothing. Withdrawals labeled authorized. My signature appeared on forms I had never seen. My designs were gone too. The shared drives had been wiped clean. When I called the bank, the representative said the power of attorney on file allowed the transfers. My stomach dropped. That wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. I drove to Lydia's office, my hands shaking on the wheel. She met me in the lobby, her expression practiced and professional. "You shouldn't make a scene," she whispered. "It won't help." When I asked where my money was, she tilted her head like she pitied me. "It's gone, Hannah. The company folded. You'll get a letter from the attorney next week." I told her I wanted every document, every signature, every explanation. "I can't," she said. "Marcus, no." Evan handled the paperwork. She corrected herself mid-sentence and something inside me went very still. The letter came 3 days later. It was written in sterile language about assumed risk liability waivers and partnership clauses. My name was on every page. So were clauses granting Evan full access to my accounts and design rights. I had signed my own undoing. Then came the foreclosure notice, 60 days to vacate. My studio lease expired the same week my business account overdrawn. The jewelry box that held my grandmother's ring and the bracelet my mother gave me for graduation was empty. Evan knew the combination to the safe. I sold what I could, tools, sketches, furniture I'd built by hand. A few clients owed small balances, but those checks barely covered gas and groceries. Each day blurred into the next. I woke up early not because I had anywhere to be, but because I couldn't stand the quiet. I answered emails on borrowed Wi-Fi, pretending my company was still alive. At night, I folded my belongings into boxes until all that remained fit into the trunk of my car. When the house finally emptied, I stood in the doorway one last time, tracing the grooves in the wall where I'd measured color samples. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee. I locked the door, slipped the key under the mat, and walked to the curb without looking back. The first night in the car was colder than I expected. The second night I learned which parking lots had security guards who didn't knock. By the end of the week, I'd memorized the rhythm of the streetlights and the hours when the Walmart lot stayed quietest. My gym membership became a lifeline, a shower, a mirror, a place to pretend for an hour that life still followed a schedule. I tried to reach Evan again once, not for answers, but to hear what kind of person he would become under pressure. The call went straight to voicemail. Lydia blocked me entirely. A mutual friend mentioned seeing photos of them on a beach, drinks in hand, smiling like nothing had ever happened. Word spread quickly in our small industry. Someone told me my former clients had heard rumors of a mental breakdown. Others said I'd mismanaged funds. I wanted to defend myself, but I had no proof and nowhere to stand. My designs, my name had been claimed by someone else. The hardest part wasn't hunger or sleep. It was the silence that came when no one called. I'd been surrounded by people for years, contractors, assistants, clients, but now the phone stayed dark. I sat in parking lots watching families carry groceries to their cars and wondered how people managed to keep their lives so intact. One morning, parked near a Starbucks, I opened my laptop to send another email. One more try for a small freelance job that might buy me a week of safety. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then a shadow fell across my table. "Hannah Whitaker," a voice asked. I looked up, blinking against the sun, and there stood Victor Hale, the developer whose boutique hotel I had designed 3 years earlier. His suit looked the same as I remembered, impeccable, understated, but his expression was softer. "It's been a long time," he said. I tried to smile to act like the person he used to know. My coffee had gone cold. He didn't pretend not to see the exhaustion in my face. "May I sit?" he asked. That moment, his voice, the kindness in it, was the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope, maybe. Or simply the reminder that not everyone walks away when you fall. I nodded, and as he sat down across from me, I didn't yet know that this conversation would change the direction of everything that came next. Victor sat across from me at that Starbucks table, his hands folded, watching me with the quiet patience of someone used to long negotiations. "You did the Hale Boutique Hotel," he said, nodding once. "It's still the most photographed lobby in California." My throat tightened. I hadn't heard anyone speak about my work like that in months. I managed a small thank you, and he leaned forward. "Tell me what happened," he said simply. It took a while before the words came out. I told him about Evan and Lydia, about the investment, the drained accounts, the signatures that weren't mine. I told him how my name had disappeared from designs that I'd built from scratch. He didn't interrupt, not even once. He listened the way people used to when stories mattered. When I finished, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "Talent like yours shouldn't be sleeping in a car," he said. His tone wasn't pity. It was matter-of-fact, like a line item in a budget. "I have a proposal, but only if you're ready to work." For a second, I didn't answer. Too many promises had turned to ash already. He must have seen that hesitation because he added, "A legitimate offer." "A job. My company's launching a major project called Riverside Heights. I need a creative director, someone who can see beyond numbers." The name sounded familiar. I'd read about the development months earlier, a multi-million-dollar project already making headlines. He reached into his jacket and handed me a card. "Think about it, but not for too long. We start in 8 weeks." The next morning, I walked into Victor's downtown office, the one with glass walls that caught every inch of sunlight over the bay. His assistant offered coffee, and Victor motioned me inside. Before we moved forward, he said, "There's something you need to see." He turned his computer screen toward me. My own designs filled the page, my colors, my layouts, my handwriting on sample boards, but the header bore a name that made my stomach twist. "Whitaker and Brooks Design." Victor said softly, "Your sister and fiancé have been shopping your portfolio around town." I stared at the screen until the shapes blurred. "They're using my work." He nodded. "Already secured 2 contracts, but if we act carefully, we can prove everything." I asked how. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "You start here. Officially. We document your process. We gather proof emails, drafts, timestamps. Then when the time's right, we make it public." His voice was steady, confident. "Not revenge," he said when I didn't answer. "Justice." He handed me a folder, crisp and heavy. "Employment agreement. Salary, benefits, full creative control." The number made me blink. It was twice my best year. I looked up. "Why me?" He smiled faintly. "Because you understand loss. People who've been broken build differently." Later that night, I opened my old laptop in the car and logged into an email account I hadn't touched since college. It took 3 tries to remember the password. Inside were years of sketches and drafts stored without anyone knowing. Each file had a timestamp proof of when the designs had been created long before Evan or Lydia ever saw them. I sent the login to Victor's legal team with shaking hands. The next morning, I met Marissa Cole, Victor's lead attorney. She was sharp-eyed and quick, her questions firing like a metronome. "Original work," she said. "Can you verify authorship file metadata witnesses?" I showed her what I had. "Good," she said, flipping through the pages. They were sloppy. She pushed another folder across the table. "Your sister filed copyrights last month under her name. That's federal fraud." Each day after that blurred into the next. I moved into a small corporate apartment near the project site, a temporary place with clean sheets and quiet walls. My new badge read, Creative Director. For the first time in months, I had a desk that wasn't the dashboard of a car. I spent hours rebuilding drafting plans, meeting engineers, choosing materials. Riverside Heights started to take shape on paper, and then on screen, a city within a city. At night, Marissa's team combed through evidence. My old clients came forward with emails and invoices proving that Evan had pitched my designs while I was sleeping in parking lots. Each discovery made the case stronger. "They underestimated you," Marissa said one evening, closing her laptop. "People like that always do." Weeks passed. I poured every ounce of energy into the project, turning the pain into precision. The designs were more than work now, they were a record of survival. Every reclaimed beam, every light fixture made from recycled glass carried the same unspoken message: this is what rebuilding looks like. Victor checked in often, never hovering, always supportive. "You're ahead of schedule," he said one afternoon, glancing through the renderings. "Keep going. The launch event will be your stage." His tone held a weight I didn't yet understand. Later, when I saw the guest list, I realized why. Evan and Lydia were on it. They had RSVP'd under their company name, Whitaker and Brooks Design Group. Marissa smiled when I told her. "Perfect," she said. "We'll let them walk right into it." She spread out documents across her desk, copyright violations, forged signatures, false filings. "We'll have everything ready. But you decide how public it gets." I didn't answer right away. I thought about those nights in the Walmart parking lot, the smell of asphalt and rain, the sound of my own breathing in the dark. "Public," I said finally. "Let everyone see who they really are." In the weeks that followed, preparation became precision. Victor's marketing team coordinated with press outlets. Marissa finalized the case files. I worked with my design crew, a team of 20, who treated me like a leader, not a victim. They didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. The only thing that mattered was the work. Riverside Heights grew from sketches into scale models, its open spaces filled with natural light, the kind I hadn't seen in months. Every evening I stayed behind in the studio after the others left. The city lights reflected on the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting gold lines across the drawings. I thought about what would happen when Evan and Lydia walked into that ballroom and saw me standing there. I didn't know if I'd shake or smile or if my voice would even hold steady, but I knew I wouldn't run. 2 days before the launch, Marissa handed me a final folder. "Everything's ready," she said. "Copyright filings, wire fraud evidence, witness statements. All you have to do is stand up and tell the truth." I nodded, though my hands felt heavier than they should have. That night I drove past the Walmart where I used to park, the one with the flickering streetlight. The same security guard was there, sipping from a paper cup. For a moment I almost stopped, but I kept going. The skyline ahead glowed like a promise. The morning of the event arrived clear and bright. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, every detail aligned, every display lit. My name was on the agenda now: Hannah Whitaker, Creative Director, Hale Development. Guests began arriving before noon, suits and dresses, laughter echoing through the space. I stood off to the side, folder in hand, watching the doors. When they opened again, I saw them. Evan's polished smile, Lydia's confident stride. They moved through the crowd like nothing had ever touched them. I watched from a distance, calm, invisible, ready. They didn't know that every step they took brought them closer to the moment when everything would turn. The hum of voices swelled around us, the air thick with anticipation. Victor's assistant leaned in and whispered, "Showtime in 30. I nodded, my heart steady, the folder still against my palm. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid. The day of the launch began long before the first guest arrived. By noon, the ballroom glowed under rows of crystal chandeliers, each reflection catching on the glass models displayed across the room. My team moved quietly, checking lighting and alignment, fine-tuning every detail until the space felt alive. Riverside Heights looked like what we had promised. It would be a new kind of luxury, grounded in calm and light. I stood near the stage, reviewing my notes one last time, the folder in my hands a little heavier than its weight suggested. Inside it were the proofs, the contracts, and the copies of every file that tied my name to the designs. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers. By the time the clock neared 3, the early arrivals began filtering in. I recognized a few faces: developers, architects, city officials, all dressed for success. They greeted Victor first, shaking his hand with practiced warmth. His presence carried quiet authority, and it steadied me more than I expected. "You've done well," he murmured as he passed, adjusting his cufflinks. "Stay focused." I nodded, my heart steady but alert. Every move today had been rehearsed. Every word had been chosen carefully. Then I saw them. Evan and Lydia stepped through the glass doors as if the afternoon belonged to them. He wore the same confident grin that had once felt like home, and she followed in a tailored red dress that shimmered with every step. They carried a bouquet of white lilies and roses, my old favorite. The gesture would have looked thoughtful to anyone else. To me, it looked like performance. They paused to scan the room, and I could almost see the calculation in their eyes. They were hunting opportunity, not memories. I stayed near the display boards, half shielded by a group of designers, reviewing the scale model. Evan approached the investors from Goldman Partners, the ones Victor had been courting for weeks. His voice carried easily across the room. "Our firm specializes in sustainable luxury," he said, his tone polished and professional. "We're finalizing design concepts for Phase 2. Lydia nodded, smiling like she belonged there. "Our portfolio speaks for itself," she added, tapping the edge of a brochure. The words hit like a cold wind, my designs, my concepts, stolen twice over. They didn't recognize me at first. I had traded thrift store clothes for a dark suit that fit like armor and hair that framed my face instead of hiding it. To them, I was just another professional in a sea of names. I could have stayed invisible, but that wasn't the plan. The launch had a schedule, and Victor had made sure of one thing: when the truth came out, there would be witnesses. At 4:30, I took my place near the presentation screen. Guests found their seats, their laughter softening into anticipation. Evan and Lydia were near the front, chatting easily with a group of developers, the same people who would soon see them for who they really were. The thought didn't feel vengeful. It just felt inevitable. The MC stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the creative director of Hale Development." The words hung for a moment before the spotlight turned toward me. Chairs shifted. Evan's voice trailed off mid-sentence. Lydia turned and the color drained from her face. I walked forward calm and measured my heels steady against the polished floor. Evan recovered first. "Hannah," he said, forcing a smile as he stood. "You're here. We were wondering if you'd gotten our messages." Lydia followed, holding out the bouquet. "We were worried about you," she said, her voice sweet but tight. I looked at the flowers, then at her, saying nothing. "It's been a long time," I answered instead. "I've been busy." Evan lowered his voice. "Let's not make a scene," the same tone he used to use when he wanted control. "We can talk after the presentation, maybe even work together again. You could consult for us." He said it softly, as if offering me a favor. Lydia placed a hand on my arm. "It's not too late, hon. We could rebuild the firm family first, right?" For a moment, the noise of the room seemed to fade. I looked at the two of them standing there dressed in borrowed confidence and felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not even triumph. Just clarity. "Family first," I repeated quietly, stepping past them. "That's exactly what I'm doing." The lights dimmed and the projector came to life. Victor took the podium, his voice clear and even. Riverside Heights represents 18 months of innovation, precision, and vision. But none of it would exist without the mind that designed it. Evan straightened in his seat. Lydia brushed imaginary lint from her sleeve. They thought he meant them. The next words silenced the room. "Please welcome the creative director of Hale Development, Hannah Whitaker." A ripple moved through the audience as I reached the stage. Phones lifted, faces turned. Behind me, the screens filled with renderings of Riverside Heights, followed by images of the earlier projects that had built my career, projects Evan and Lydia had claimed as theirs. I could hear the air leave Evan's lungs. Lydia's hand froze around her clutch. I began simply. "I've been designing sustainable spaces for 8 years," I said, the microphone amplifying each word. "Some of you have walked through my work without knowing it." The slides shifted, each image date-stamped and notarized. "This is my portfolio, my work, and my signature. Every project you've seen presented under another name came from these designs." The evidence flashed across the screen, side-by-side comparisons, matching details, timelines, and emails. Evan stood suddenly, his voice strained. "She's unstable," he called out. "She's not well. Lydia and I have been helping her rebuild." Lydia tried to follow his lead. "She's been through a lot," she said, forcing a tremor into her voice. "We've tried to support her." Their words fell flat against the murmur spreading through the crowd. I turned to face them fully. "You've told people I was unstable." I said evenly, "that I'd lost my business. What you didn't say was that while I slept in my car, you used my designs to build your own." Gasps filled the room. The slide behind me changed again, showing copyright filings in Lydia's name for projects dated years before her claim. "Forgery, copyright fraud, and wire fraud," I said. "All documented." Security moved quietly to the edges of the room. 2 uniformed officers appeared at the back. Evan's face drained of color. Lydia swayed slightly, clutching the back of a chair. Reporters began recording openly, now flashes lighting the dim room. Victor stepped forward. "These matters are now in the hands of the district attorney," he said calmly. "Our company supports the legal process fully." The officers walked down the aisle, their voices low but firm. "Evan Brooks, you're wanted for questioning in connection with fraud allegations." The words carried through the microphone by accident, clear enough for everyone to hear. Lydia froze as the second officer approached. "Ms. Whitaker, you'll need to come with us." Evan tried to pull away. "This is a mistake," he shouted. Lydia turned toward me, tears starting to rise. "Hannah, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Tell them I didn't know." I met her eyes for one brief second. "You knew." The officers led them toward the exit as the room filled with a low hum of disbelief. Investors whispered into phones. Cameras clicked. The sound of handcuffs felt both distant and final. When the doors closed behind them, the silence that followed was heavy. Victor returned to the microphone. Now he set his tone even again. "Let's continue with the presentation." The crowd exhaled as if remembering where they were. I looked out over the sea of faces, some sympathetic, others stunned, and felt the tightness in my chest finally ease. The rest of the event moved like a dream. Reporters swarmed Victor afterward. Investors shook my hand, congratulating me, their voices full of approval I hadn't expected. Marissa found me near the stage, her expression calm but proud. "It's done," she said. "Now we let the law do the rest." I left the ballroom as the sun set, the sky fading from gold to violet over the bay. My reflection followed me in the tall windows, unfamiliar but steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from anything. The story that began with a signature was no longer mine to carry alone. The next step, justice itself, was already in motion. The morning after the launch, I woke up before sunrise, unsure if the silence outside was peace or exhaustion. The events of the night before replayed in flashes, the lights, the faces, the sound of the officers reading Evan and Lydia their rights. My phone buzzed with messages I hadn't opened. Headlines were already spreading across industry feeds, each one repeating the same words: fraud exposure, arrested at launch. The truth was out, but the storm had only just started. When I arrived at Victor's office, the staff stood a little straighter than usual. Marissa was already there, standing beside a stack of folders. "It's begun," she said simply. She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen were statements from investors withdrawing from Evan and Lydia's firm posts, from clients demanding refunds, and screenshots of contracts now frozen by legal order. "The DA has filed preliminary charges," she continued. "Wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, and copyright infringement. More will follow once the victims come forward." I sat down across from her, still trying to process it all. "How many victims?" I asked quietly. "So far 12, she replied, "but more are contacting us every hour." She paused. "Hannah, we're establishing a restitution fund for those affected. Victor's agreed to contribute the seed money. It's the right thing to do." Victor entered just then, his jacket draped over his arm. "This industry needs transparency," he said. "If we handle this correctly, it's not just justice, it's reform." He gave me a reassuring look. "You took the hardest step already. Now we make sure others don't go through what you did." The next few days unfolded in waves. Reporters called non-stop. Former clients sent messages of support. A few even admitted they'd believed the rumors Evan and Lydia had spread about me and apologized for staying silent. The story had captured public attention in a way none of us expected. "Designer exposes fraud at luxury launch," one headline read. Another called it the most public downfall in California real estate. In the middle of it all, I kept working. Riverside Heights had deadlines, and I refused to let the chaos steal what I'd built. Each morning, I met with my design team, reviewed materials, and pushed the project forward. But in quieter moments when the meetings ended and the offices emptied, the reality of what had happened would wash over me, everything I'd lost and everything I'd finally reclaimed. One afternoon, a man stopped by the office, gray-haired, dressed in a dark suit. He introduced himself as William Brooks, Evan's father. The name hit like a cold wind. He didn't wait for an invitation before sitting down across from me. "You've made your point," he said, his voice clipped. "But this has gone too far. My son may have made mistakes, but prison helps no one. Let us settle privately." I folded my hands on the table. "Your son emptied my accounts, stole my work, and left me homeless," I said quietly. "What exactly would a private settlement teach him? Restitution," he said quickly. "Full repayment with interest. We'll wire the funds within 48 hours if you agree to withdraw your complaint." His tone made it sound like a business transaction, not a consequence. Marissa entered mid-conversation, her expression cool. "That's not an option, Mr. Brooks. Charges have already been filed by the district attorney. This isn't civil anymore." He ignored her and turned back to me. "Think about your reputation, Miss Whitaker. These things always follow both parties. Do you really want to be tied to this story for the rest of your career?" I met his gaze, steady and calm. "I already was," I said. "But now it's tied to the truth." His jaw tightened and he rose from his chair. "You'll regret this," he muttered before walking out. Marissa closed the door behind him and sighed. "They never come to apologize," she said softly, "only to negotiate." That evening, I stopped by the studio alone. The city outside was alive with lights, but the quiet inside felt almost sacred. I walked past the models and renderings, fingers brushing the edges of the boards. It was strange how the same designs that once represented loss now stood as proof of survival. News coverage expanded over the next week. Video clips from the launch went viral. Commentators debated ethics and accountability. Lydia's tearful image leaving the courthouse appeared on every major outlet. Evan was shown in handcuffs, head lowered, his lawyer shielding him from cameras. Marissa's updates became more detailed. The DA's office confirmed they're expanding charges to include organized fraud, she said one morning. "It's not just what they did to you, it's a pattern going back years. Investors, contractors, even family members." Each new revelation brought a strange mix of sadness and closure. There were moments when I almost didn't recognize the people being described: the man who once cooked me dinner, the sister who'd braided my hair before job interviews. The justice felt right, but the grief still came in quiet waves. One afternoon, I returned from a client meeting to find a delivery at my office, an envelope without a return address. Inside was a handwritten note: "Please drop the charges. Lydia's not strong enough for prison." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need to guess. The handwriting belonged to my aunt. I placed the note in a drawer without replying. Some bridges once burned didn't need rebuilding. Meanwhile, Victor and Marissa coordinated with the district attorney's office to establish the restitution fund. We held a press conference announcing it a small, focused effort to reimburse victims and rebuild trust in the design community. I spoke briefly, explaining how it wasn't about revenge, but responsibility. The cameras flashed, but for once the attention didn't feel invasive. It felt purposeful. Afterward, Victor found me backstage. "You've done something bigger than clearing your name," he said. "You've set a standard." His words stayed with me as the weeks turned to months. The financial fallout for Evan and Lydia was immediate. Their firm collapsed within days of the arrests. Their assets were frozen, properties repossessed. Lydia's brokerage license was suspended, and Evan's corporate credentials revoked. Their names disappeared from company websites, erased as if they'd never existed. When the preliminary hearings began, Marissa accompanied me to court. I sat behind the prosecution's table watching as the judge reviewed the evidence. Evan looked smaller than I remembered, his confidence stripped away. Lydia avoided my eyes entirely. The charges were read aloud: wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy. The words echoed in the courtroom, firm and final. As the session ended, Lydia turned, once her expression desperate. "Hannah, please," she whispered as the bailiff led her past. I didn't respond. The time for explanations had passed. Outside, the afternoon light caught the courthouse steps, bathing everything in a strange, forgiving glow. Marissa handed me a copy of the filed restitution fund paperwork. "It's official," she said. "You'll be administering the claims." I looked down at the document, my name printed beneath the title Director of Creative Justice Fund. The words carried a weight I didn't expect, one that felt less about punishment and more about rebuilding. That night, Victor called. "The board approved the expansion of your role," he said. "Starting next quarter, you'll oversee design across all Hale projects statewide." His voice softened. "You earned this, Hannah. You turned a scandal into a standard." I thanked him, though words felt small. After the call, I stood at my window overlooking the bay. The same view I'd once stared at from a car windshield now stretched before me from a home I'd built again. The city below shimmered with possibility. Justice had arrived, but something quieter followed behind it, peace. And though the road ahead was still unfolding, I finally knew I wasn't walking it alone. The next morning, the phone rang again, Marissa's number flashing on the screen. Her voice was calm but serious. "They're asking for your statement for sentencing," she said. "Both of them. Their lawyers want character testimony." For a long moment I said nothing, only listening to the hum of the line. Then I exhaled. "Tell them no," I said quietly. No is enough. It wasn't anger that filled the silence afterward, just finality. And somewhere beyond that, the faint, steady sound of life moving forward. Marissa's call that morning felt like a small echo of everything we'd already been through. "They've both requested statements for sentencing," she said. Her tone was calm, but the air between her words carried a kind of tension I recognized too well. Character references or anything that might reduce the time they serve. I stood by the window of my office, looking out over the bay, where sunlight shimmered like 1,000 moving pieces of glass. "They want mercy," I said quietly. "They always did." Marissa hesitated before answering. "You're not obligated to respond. I can handle the communication." I thanked her, but something in me needed to hear the request directly. It wasn't about closure. It was about the silence that followed their betrayal, the months when no one had cared enough to ask my side. "Forward them," I said. "I'll reply once." By the end of the day, 2 letters arrived, one from Evan's legal team, the other from Lydia's. They were nearly identical in formality, but the tone beneath each was different. Evan's was filled with legal phrasing about remorse and rehabilitation, implying I could influence his sentencing with a statement about his prior integrity. Lydia's letter was shorter, written in a tone that pretended familiarity. It mentioned family forgiveness and faith. She ended it with one line, "Please remember we shared a home before we lost our way." I placed both letters on my desk and left them there for 2 days without touching them. Work came first. Riverside Heights was entering its final design phase, and every floor plan required approval. My team was thriving. Our names were on magazines now, our designs discussed in boardrooms I once couldn't enter without a guest pass. Life had settled into something I could call steady again, though I still carried the quiet caution that comes from rebuilding after fire. When I finally opened the letters again, it was after midnight. The city lights flickered through my blinds, tracing pale lines across the pages. I read every word, slowly making sure I felt the weight of what they were asking. When I finished, I turned to a blank page and wrote one sentence, "No statement will be provided." I read it aloud once, the sound small but final in the empty room. The next morning, Marissa nodded when I told her. Short and clear, she said. "It's better that way." I signed the document and watched her place it in an envelope addressed to the court. "No is a complete sentence," she added softly before leaving my office. 2 weeks later, the headlines returned. Both sentences were announced publicly, 12 years for Evan, 8 for Lydia. The coverage was factual, without the drama that had followed their arrests. Their parents released a short statement about disappointment and privacy. After that silence, I thought the quiet would feel like relief, but instead it felt like space, open, unfamiliar, waiting to be filled with something new. So I poured it into work. The Hale Development Board had approved Victor's proposal to expand our design division, and I was overseeing the hiring process. We brought in architects from across the state, people who valued collaboration over ego. Each new face reminded me how much could be built from trust when it wasn't taken for granted. Outside of work, my world grew in smaller, gentler ways. I bought a modest house in the Oakland Hills, a place with wide windows and a small garden that overlooked the city. Every morning the fog rolled over the bay like a soft blanket before the sun began to warm the rooftops. I furnished the rooms slowly with pieces I built or refinished myself. Each nail, each brush stroke felt like reclaiming a part of the life they'd stolen. The first week I moved in, a delivery arrived. I hadn't ordered a white box with a florist's seal. Inside were roses and lilies, the same kind Lydia once used to decorate her office, the same kind she'd brought to the launch before it all fell apart. There was no note, but the handwriting on the label was familiar. I carried the box outside and left it by the curb before going back inside. By late spring, the Riverside Heights project neared completion. The buildings rose like glass sculptures against the skyline, their reflections shifting with every hour of daylight. When I walked through the nearly finished spaces, I could see my own handwriting on the plans, my initials, etched into the foundation prints. Victor joined me one afternoon during a walk through, the sound of construction humming softly around us. "You've rebuilt more than a project here," he said, glancing at the sunlight filtering through the windows. "You've rebuilt faith in work and people, maybe even in yourself." I smiled faintly. Maybe. The grand opening drew attention across the industry. Reporters, investors, and city officials filled the atrium, admiring the detail of the designs. Victor took the stage first, introducing me as the lead behind the project. When I stepped forward, the applause was polite at first, then grew warmer. I thanked the team, the community, and every person who had helped make the vision real. I didn't mention the past, not once. Some stories don't need retelling when their echoes are already understood. After the event, Victor's assistant found me near the entrance with a stack of envelopes. "Congratulations," she said. "Press wants interviews and Architectural Digest confirmed the feature." The words still felt surreal. I accepted them quietly, grateful for the kind of attention that came from hard work, not scandal. Weeks later, the cover hit newsstands Riverside Heights beneath the headline, "Designing Redemption." The article mentioned my name briefly, but focused more on sustainable innovation. Still, people noticed. Emails came from universities inviting me to guest lecture and from students asking how to protect their work. Those messages reminded me why I'd started designing in the first place, to make spaces that gave people dignity. One evening, as I prepared to leave the office, Marissa stopped by with a folder. "A reporter from the Chronicle called," she said. "They're running a follow-up on the trial. Do you want to comment?" I shook my head. "No," I said simply. "The story's over." She smiled. "Then we'll let it rest." The months that followed felt quiet in the best way. My days found rhythm: morning coffee on the patio, design reviews in the studio, walks in the neighborhood after sunset. I planted herbs in the garden and spent weekends restoring an old oak table I'd found at an estate sale. Sometimes, though, the past still brushed against the edges of the present. A former colleague would mention Evan's name in passing, or a news alert would flash about Lydia's appeal being denied. Each time the sting was smaller, fading into distance. One night, as I stood in the doorway of my studio, the view of the bay spread wide below. I thought about the phrase Victor had said earlier that year, rebuilding faith. Maybe that's what all of this had been. Not revenge, not victory, but a slow, steady act of faith. In work, in new beginnings, in the belief that good foundations could outlast any storm. The following morning, an envelope arrived from the district attorney's office. Inside was an update about the restitution fund. Every verified victim had been repaid in full. The balance sheet showed the fund's remaining surplus, and a note at the bottom read, "Recommendation convert. Remaining balance to permanent support for creative fraud victims." I brought the proposal to Victor that afternoon. "We'll do it," he said without hesitation. "Call it the Whitaker Initiative." I tried to object, but he waved me off. "You earned it. Let it stand for something good." That night, as the sun sank behind the skyline, I walked through my home, touching the edges of each frame, each piece of furniture, each small mark of a life rebuilt. The garden outside swayed gently in the evening breeze, the air carrying a faint scent of lavender. For the first time in a long while, I realized the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like peace, quiet, certain, and entirely mine. The next chapter, whatever it was, would begin from here. The weeks following the sentencing passed quietly, though reminders of it appeared everywhere. News anchors mentioned the case in short clips before moving on to lighter stories. Industry newsletters praised the restitution fund, calling it a model for corporate integrity. I didn't read most of it. The media had finally lost interest, and that silence felt like something worth keeping. One gray afternoon, I found a letter slipped under the door of my office. The handwriting was unfamiliar but careful. Inside was a single page from a man named Aaron Delaney, one of the contractors who'd testified against Evan and Lydia. He wrote that he'd received full repayment from the restitution fund and wanted to thank me personally. "People like me never get justice," the letter said. "You changed that." I placed it in a drawer beside a small collection of similar notes. They reminded me that even the worst chapters could leave behind something decent. Work at Hale Development moved forward with its own steady rhythm. Our team expanded, and I began mentoring younger designers who reminded me of myself years earlier, eager, uncertain, and full of ideas. Each morning, the office buzzed with conversation and the quiet tapping of keyboards, a hum that sounded like progress. Victor often passed through the design wing greeting everyone by name. One morning, he paused by my desk, resting a hand on the back of my chair. "You've built something lasting here," he said. "That's harder than people think." We were finalizing the second phase of Riverside Heights when Marissa called to check in. "Everything's stable," she said, her tone professional but warm. "But you should know there's been an appeal filing from Lydia's attorney. Nothing significant, it won't change the outcome. Just a formality." I thanked her and hung up, feeling more weary than worried. I had learned by then that some people couldn't let go even when the truth had already been written in ink. That evening, I drove home along the familiar curve of the hills, the sky streaked pink and silver over the bay. My house waited with its quiet rooms and the scent of cedar from the small fire I'd left smoldering in the hearth. I brewed tea, opened the windows, and sat by the garden where lavender brushed softly against the fence. For the first time in years, there were no deadlines chasing me, no messages from people demanding pieces of my peace. A week later, a small article appeared in the local paper. Whitaker Initiative expands to national program for creative fraud victims. The headline felt surreal. The fund had grown faster than anyone expected, supported by donations from designers, architects, and entrepreneurs who'd followed the case. Victor had insisted the program bear my name, and though I'd protested, the decision had already gone public. We held a quiet ceremony in a downtown community space, no photographers, just partners, advocates, and the first group of recipients. I met a young architect named Maya at that event. She couldn't have been more than 24. Her business partner had drained their shared account and vanished, leaving her thousands in debt. The fund had helped her reopen her studio. "I saw your story online," she told me, eyes bright with both fear and determination. "I didn't think I could start over until I read what you did." Her words stayed with me long after the evening ended. They reminded me why the fight had been worth every sleepless night. Spring turned to summer. I traveled for the first time in years, visiting design conferences and meeting people who wanted to collaborate. Each trip felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized was missing. On one of those flights home, I looked out over the clouds and thought about the life that might have been if things had gone differently, if I'd never met Evan, if Lydia had stayed honest. The thought passed quickly. The life I had now wasn't built from avoidance. It was built from surviving what was meant to break me. By late August, Riverside Heights officially opened to the public. The launch drew a crowd of investors, city leaders, and community advocates. Reporters called it a triumph for sustainable urban design, but for me, it was something quieter, a closing of the circle. As I walked through the finished atrium, sunlight spilled through glass walls that filtered heat and refracted color in soft tones. The space felt alive, open, and peaceful, just as I had imagined it 2 years before, while sitting in a car with no home to go back to. Victor found me standing near the central fountain after the ceremony. They're already talking about giving Riverside a National Design Award? He said, a small smile crossing his face. I'll make sure your team gets the recognition they deserve. I nodded, grateful but tired. Let's see where it goes, I said. He studied me for a moment, then added quietly, You don't have to prove anything anymore, Hannah. I didn't answer, but his words lingered long after he walked away. Later that night, back at home, I checked my email before bed. Among the project updates and newsletters was one new message without a subject line. The sender's name made me pause. Claire Brooks Evans' mother. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The email was short, only a few lines. He's struggling. They both are. Whatever they did, please know they're paying for it every day. I hope someday you can find peace enough to forgive them. I read it twice, then clicked archive without replying. Forgiveness had already happened in the quiet way that healing sometimes does, without ceremony, without contact, without anyone noticing. It wasn't something I needed to send back to them. A few days later, Victor hosted a small dinner at his home for the project leads. The evening was warm, the air soft with the scent of jasmine from his garden. I sat across from Marissa, who was relaxed for the first time in months. You look lighter, she said with a smile, like the weight finally lifted. I shrugged slightly. Maybe it just shifted, I said. She laughed quietly. Either way, you carried it well. When I got home that night, I placed my keys on the counter and turned on the small lamp by the window. The house felt peaceful, its stillness no longer heavy. I walked through each room, touching the furniture I'd chosen, the framed drawings on the wall, the small life I'd rebuilt piece by piece. Outside, the city lights stretched across the horizon, glowing like a constellation made by human hands. Before turning in, I sat at my desk and wrote a short note to Victor, thanking him for everything, the mentorship, the trust, the belief that people could start over. I didn't send it right away. Some words were meant to sit overnight before being shared. As I turned off the light, the house settled around me, quiet and warm. There was no lingering bitterness, no echo of the chaos that had once filled my days. What remained was steady, a life reclaimed, rebuilt, and finally at peace. The next morning brought a new kind of calm, the kind that comes after years of turbulence. The world outside kept moving, deadlines, waiting, new projects calling. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was chasing anything. Some stories end with apology, others with victory. Mine was closing with something simpler, balance. And as the first light crept through the blinds, I knew that whatever came next, it would begin on my terms. It's been 2 years since the Riverside Heights opening, and the city feels different now, lighter somehow, like the air finally stopped holding its breath. My days begin early with the smell of coffee drifting through my kitchen and the hum of birds outside the window. The world has grown quiet in a way that doesn't scare me anymore. Silence used to mean loss. Now it feels like space. The Whitaker Initiative has grown far beyond what I imagined. We've helped dozens of artists, designers, and small creators recover stolen work and rebuild their lives. Each time a new case crosses my desk, I see a reflection of the person I used to be, someone still searching for solid ground after betrayal. We don't just write checks, we listen, we document, and we help them find their footing again. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from giving someone the chance to start fresh. Victor retired last spring, leaving the company in my hands. He said he wanted to spend more time near the coast where the mornings smell of salt and possibility. Before he left, he stopped by my office with a single envelope. Inside was the original contract from the day he hired me, signed, dated, and framed beneath a note that read, "Rebuild, and let no one take this from you again." It hangs on the wall behind my desk now, a quiet reminder of where strength can begin. Marissa still calls every few weeks, mostly to check in. She jokes that I've become her favorite success story. I remind her she's the one who made sure the law worked the way it should. She just laughs and says it's rare when doing the right thing actually feels this good. The truth is, people like her and Victor changed more than my career. They changed the way I see what's worth protecting. As for Evan and Lydia, I haven't seen either of them since the sentencing. Word reached me through Marissa that they both served time quietly, no appeals, no press. I never asked for updates beyond that. Some stories don't need to circle back around. What matters is the distance, the space between who I was then and who I've become. There's no bitterness left, only understanding. Not everyone who hurts you is meant to face your version of closure. Sometimes the truest form of peace is letting go of the need for it. My home has settled into its own rhythm. The garden out back is alive with color, lavender, sage, and white roses that bloom without asking permission. On weekends, I host small dinners for friends and colleagues, the kind where conversation drifts long after dessert. There's laughter again, the kind that feels easy, not borrowed. Some evenings I'll walk to the edge of the yard where the lights of the city stretch wide below, and I think about the woman who once sat in a parked car, staring at those same lights, trying to believe in another tomorrow. I wish she could see this life now. Every so often a letter arrives from someone I've helped through the initiative. One came last month from a photographer in Arizona. She wrote, "You gave me back my name." I folded the paper carefully and placed it beside the others. There's no better reminder of why I chose to stand up that day, why I didn't stay silent when everything fell apart. The justice system did its part, but what mattered most was learning how to live again afterward, with dignity intact and no fear of starting over. Looking back, I can see how every decision, even the painful ones, built towards something stronger. Losing everything stripped away what was fragile. Rebuilding taught me how to choose what stays. I don't measure success by wealth or recognition anymore. I measure it by peace, the kind that sits quietly inside your chest when you know you did the right thing, even when no one was watching. If there's one truth I've learned, it's that boundaries are more than walls. They're foundations. They keep what's worth protecting safe, and they remind you that love without respect isn't love at all. You can forgive without reopening a door. You can move on without turning back. And you can find grace even after the world has taken more than its share. These days, when I sit at my desk in the soft light of early morning, I look out across the bay and think about how far I've come from that winter night when everything ended. The scars don't fade, not completely, but they stop aching. They become part of the design proof that something broken can still hold beauty, strength, and purpose. I used to believe justice was about balance, about making things even. Now I understand it's about restoration, bringing life back to what was lost. The rest will always be background noise, and if you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal or start over when no one believed you could, I hope you remember this. You are never starting from nothing. You're starting from experience, from truth, from the quiet courage that carried you this far. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to something in you, take a moment to share it, or maybe just sit with it. Sometimes that's enough. And if you've ever rebuilt your life from the ground up, I hope today you realize you didn't just survive. You started again.